Commander Teo stood alone at the great observation window of the Concordia station, watching the stars shine in the endless darkness of space. For 150 years, humanity had lived in peace under the watchful eye of the Valorian Collective. The treaty that was signed in 2174 had saved the human race from extinction, and in return, humans promised to never develop weapons that could threaten the Valorian Empire. Those 150 years had been good to humanity. Cities grew on Mars. New colonies spread across 30 different star systems. Children were born who had never known war. Scientists made discoveries that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Engineers built machines that would have seemed like magic to the people of old Earth. Teo had lived through much of this golden age, and he loved his people deeply. But today, something felt wrong in a way that made his heart heavy. The message had arrived at 3 a.m. station time. It came from the Earth Council, encrypted in the highest security code available to humans. Teo held the data chip in his hand and felt its weight like a stone. He did not want to read it. Some part of him knew that once he opened this message, everything would change. The peace that had lasted so long would shatter like glass hitting stone. But Teo was a soldier, and soldiers did their duty even when it broke their hearts. He placed the chip into the reader and watched the words appear on the screen. Valorian fleet movement detected. All forces mobilizing toward Kepler Gate. Estimated arrival at human space, 72 hours. Council assumes hostile intent. All human forces ordered to high alert. Teo read the message 3 times. He wanted it to mean something different. He wanted there to be another explanation. But the numbers were clear. The data showed what it showed. The Valorian were coming and they were bringing everything they had. Captain Jiwan arrived at the observation deck 20 minutes later. She was young, brilliant, and strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength. She had served under Teo for 5 years, and he trusted her completely. Jiwan looked at the data on the screen, and her face went pale, like someone watching a train come toward them that they could not stop. "How is this possible?" Jiwan whispered. "They gave us their word. The treaty guaranteed." "Treaties are made by people," Teo said quietly. "People change their minds, or someone changes it for them." Down in the research center, Dr. Nari was working late, as she always did. She loved her work more than sleep, more than food, more than almost anything. She was studying the patterns of the Valorian technology, trying to understand how they built ships that could cross the galaxy. When the alert reached her station, she felt something shift in her chest. Her hands moved fast across her keyboard, pulling up every military simulation that humanity had created. She ran them all again, run after run, simulation after simulation. The answer was always the same. When she finally looked up from her screen, tears were running down her face. The other researchers gathered around her, looking at the data. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. The simulations did not lie. The Valorian were not coming to trade. They were not coming to talk. They were coming to end humanity. In every single scenario, humanity lost. In some, a few humans survived in deep space, hiding in the darkness. But on every human world, every colony, every station, there was nothing left but ash and silence. Teo went to the archives as the sun was rising over the station's eastern dome. The archives were kept cold to preserve the old documents. Many of them were not even printed on paper anymore, but Teo wanted to hold the original treaty in his hands if it still existed. He had to dig through boxes that had not been opened in generations. Some were covered in dust so thick it floated in the air like ghost smoke. Finally, he found it. A thick document bound in synthetic leather with the signatures of the human leaders from 2174 written in pen and ink. The aliens had used some kind of biological marker that had left a faint smell like burned flowers. Teo sat down on the floor of the archive, right there in the cold and the dust, and read through the treaty line by line. Most of it was exactly what he expected. There were sections about trade, about borders, about how conflicts would be solved. There were promises of peace and cooperation. But then, near the very end, buried in subsection 12 like a secret waiting to be discovered, Teo found it. His hand moved across the words slowly, making sure he was reading correctly. Upon discovery of faster-than-light weaponry by the human species, this accord shall be rendered void. All previous agreements are cancelled, and the Valorian Collective reserves the right to take any action necessary to prevent the threat of such weapons being used against our forces. Teo's breath caught in his throat. He checked the date on his computer. Humanity had finished testing their first jump gate weapon exactly 3 weeks ago. The weapon was still secret. Only the top commanders and scientists knew about it, but somehow, somewhere, the information had leaked. Or perhaps the Valorian had sensors they had not told humanity about. It did not matter how they found out. What mattered was that the treaty was now, according to the words written here, no longer valid. The peace was over. Teo carried the document up to the command center and called together the senior staff. He watched their faces as he read the treaty out loud, and he saw the exact moment when each of them understood. Captain Jiwan closed her eyes. General Minseo, who was watching from Earth through the video link, simply shook her head back and forth like someone trying to wake from a nightmare. Dr. Nari put her hand over her mouth. "What do we do?" someone asked. The voice sounded very small and very young. Teo looked out at the stars again, the same stars he had been watching when this all began. Out there somewhere, beyond the reach of human space, a vast fleet was moving through the darkness. The Valorian were coming. They had given humanity 150 years of peace, as they had promised. And in return, humanity had built the very weapon that would seal their fate. Now the bill was due, and there was nothing left to do but pay it. "We survive," Teo said finally. "However we can, however we must. We do not give up. We do not surrender. We are human. We find a way." But even as he said the words, he did not know if he believed them anymore. The stars offered no comfort, only the vast and patient darkness, waiting to see if this small species could face the end of all things and somehow survive. The first attack came at dawn. Not the dawn of any planet, but the moment when the sun rose on Earth and millions of people were just beginning their day. They saw the sky light up with streaks of fire. The Valorian did not come with one fleet or two. They came with everything. The outer colonies were hit first, places like Kepler Station, where humans had been mining rare metals for 20 years. The station had 10,000 people living on it. It had schools and hospitals and gardens where people grew food. It had everything that made a community a home. In the moment the Valorian weapon struck, all of it was gone. The strike lasted 3 minutes. 10,000 people died in those 3 minutes, but they were not the only ones. On Mars, the colony at Jezero was hit. On Europa Station orbiting Jupiter, the weapons came. On the mining settlements of the Tau Ceti system, on the trading posts of Kepler Space, everywhere that humans had built something to call home, the Valorian brought fire. The death toll climbed so fast that computers could not keep track of the numbers. First it was millions, then billions. By the time the attacks had been going for 1 full day, more humans had died than had been born in the last 50 years. The human fleets tried to fight back. They were brave and they were skilled, but they were outnumbered and unprepared. A fleet commander named Park Jun was piloting a fighter near Kepler Station when the attack began. He saw the Valorian ships come through the darkness like wolves hunting sheep. His squadron had 12 fighters. The Valorian had 300. Park Jun knew what this meant. He knew his death was coming, but he did not run. Instead, he led his pilots directly at the enemy, firing every weapon they had. For 30 minutes, they fought. By the time the Valorian destroyed the last of his fighters, Park Jun had managed to damage 2 enemy ships. 2 ships out of 300. It was not much, but it was something. Park Jun died knowing that he had at least slowed them down a little bit. Engineer Dae Sung was working in the radiation facilities on Mars when the attack orders came through. He was a young man, not yet 30, with a brilliant mind for understanding how technology worked. When he heard about the attacks, something inside him clicked into place like a key turning a lock. He understood in that moment that humanity was going to lose. They would lose because they were weak. They would lose because the Valorian had built their empire over thousands of years, while humanity had only had a few centuries of space travel. But as Dae Sung looked at the jump gate weapon designs that still existed in the facility's computers, he began to think. The weapon was designed for one purpose, to move ships instantly across space. But what if it could do more? What if the technology could be changed, twisted, made into something the designers had never imagined? Dae Sung worked without sleeping. For 18 hours straight, he studied the designs. His hands moved fast, his mind moving faster. By the time he was done, he had sent encrypted messages to every human scientist and engineer in known space. "The gates can be weaponized," his message said. "We can do this. We can fight back." General Min Seo received Dae Sung's message in the Earth Command Center. She was the oldest active military commander in the human forces. She had gray in her hair and lines on her face from 40 years of making hard decisions. When she read Dae Sung's words, she felt something that she had not felt in the last 24 hours. Hope. Maybe it was false hope. Maybe it was just a dream, but it was something. And right now, hope was all that humanity had left. Min Seo made a decision that went against everything in the military textbooks. Instead of trying to defend the colonies, she ordered a full retreat. Every human ship that could move was ordered to return to Earth and the inner solar system. The order meant that billions of people living in the outer colonies would be left behind. Min Seo knew this. It made her sick. It made her want to quit and let someone else give the order. But she gave it anyway, because she knew it was the only way to save any humans at all. The retreat was chaos. Ships crashed trying to escape. Some captains refused to leave their colonies and died with their people. But millions of humans made it. They crowded into refugee ships and military vessels. They left behind their homes, their businesses, their entire lives. They left behind people they loved who could not be saved, but they were alive. Lieutenant Park Jun's cousin, In Soo, was commanding a destroyer escort for the refugee fleet. In Soo was not a war hero like his cousin. He was just a good officer who cared about keeping people safe. When In Soo saw the size of the Valorian fleet coming toward them, he calculated that his ship could buy maybe 3 more hours of escape time for the refugees if he stayed behind and fought. 3 hours. It was not much, but it was enough time for maybe 20 million more people to get away. In Soo made his peace with that number, ordered his crew to battle stations, and turned his ship to face the enemy. The engineer Dae Sung had an idea. It was dangerous and probably would not work, but ideas were all they had left. He suggested that the human ships could use the jump gate technology in a new way. Instead of using it to move through space, they could use it to create shields. The gates could create small pockets of folded space that would protect human ships from the Valorian weapons. It was theory. It had never been tested, but Dae Sung was certain it would work. Director Ha-eun received his proposal while she was leading a team of engineers in a secret facility under the moon. Ha-eun was the head of all human weapons development. She was a woman who understood the cutting edge of what was possible. When she read Dae Sung's idea, she felt it too, the spark of something that could work. She began to gather together every brilliant engineer and scientist she could find. Some of them were still in combat zones. Some had to be rescued from collapsing colonies, but Ha-Yun found them. They came to her hidden facilities across the solar system, and they began to work on something that would change everything. While the battles raged across human space and millions died every hour, these scientists and engineers worked in secret. They worked because they had no choice. They worked because Dae Sung believed it was possible. They worked because giving up meant that all those people dying out there were dying for nothing. The Valorian continued to advance. Their fleet pushed deeper into human space, destroying everything in their way. But they did not understand humans. They did not understand that humans would sacrifice everything for a chance, just a chance, at survival. They did not understand that humans would work without eating or sleeping or resting if it meant they might save their people. The Valorian thought like a collective, thinking as one vast mind. But humans thought like individuals, each one desperate to save someone they loved, each one willing to die trying. The war that had begun with the Valorians' confident assault was becoming something different. It was becoming a war against time itself. And humanity was running out of time. 8 months passed. 8 months of war. 8 months of watching the numbers on the screens that showed how many humans were left. The Valorian had taken 2/3 of human space. They had captured colony after colony. But they had not yet broken through to Earth's inner solar system. That was because of what Director Ha-Eun's team had built. The shield technology worked. It was not perfect. Ships still died, thousands of them. But the shields meant that 10 ships could survive where before not even one would have made it. 10 times more humans were still alive because of what they had built. But survival was not living. Survival was something much harder and much worse. The refugee camps on the moons of Jupiter held 40 billion people. 40 billion people living in conditions that were meant for maybe 100 million. They slept in shifts because there were not enough places to sleep. They ate food that barely tasted like food. They breathed air that had been recycled so many times it carried the smell of too many people in too small a space. Children cried because they had never seen the sun. Old people died because the medical centers did not have enough medicine for everyone. But they were alive. 40 billion humans who would have been dead if General Min Seo had not made her decision to retreat. Dr. Lee Min was a historian. Before the war, she had spent her time studying old human conflicts, the wars that Earth's nations had fought with each other hundreds of years ago. Now she was something different. She was the person that General Min Seo called when she needed to understand the enemy. Lee Min spent her days reading everything humanity had ever recorded about the Valorian. She studied their history, their culture, their way of thinking. And slowly, she began to understand something important. The Valorian thought as one. They had lived as a collective consciousness for more than 5,000 years. Individual thoughts were not something they understood. Every decision they made was the decision of billions of minds thinking as one. This was their strength, but it was also their weakness. Lee Min discovered that the Valorian could not imagine why humans would sacrifice themselves. They could not understand the idea of a person willing to die so that someone else might live. They could not grasp the concept of hope when the mathematics said hope was impossible. Lee Min went to General Min Seo with her findings. They think in logic, Lee Min said. Pure logic. Every move they make is the move that their computers tell them will give them the best chance of winning. But humans do not always do the logical thing. Humans do fear and love and hope and pride. These things make us unpredictable. Min Seo listened to this and made a plan. If humans were unpredictable, then they would make moves that the Valorian would not expect. If humans were willing to sacrifice, then they could do things that the logical mathematics said were suicide, but that might actually work. The plan began with pilot Su Jin. She was young, only 25 years old. She had been flying spacecraft since she was 16. She was one of the best pilots in the human fleet, and she volunteered for the most dangerous mission humanity had ever created. What Ha-Eun's team had built was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was something far more radical. They had taken everything they knew about the Valorian biology and their connection to each other. They had studied the neural frequencies that bound the collective consciousness together. And they had created a machine that could broadcast a signal directly into those frequencies. The signal was designed to break the collective. Instead of one vast mind thinking as one, it would shatter them into billions of individual minds. Free will, independence, the ability to think thoughts that were not thoughts of the collective. It would be, to the Valorian, like suddenly waking up from a dream and discovering you were not alone in your head anymore. It would be chaos and confusion and fear. But it would be unpredictable. The machine was small, built into a single fighter craft, smaller than a normal military ship. Faster, but fragile. One direct hit would destroy it. Su Jin would have to fly it directly into the heart of the Valorian fleet and activate the broadcast right there in the center of their strongest forces. It was not a suicide mission exactly, because there was a small chance she might escape. But the mathematics said the chance was less than 1%. Su Jin volunteered anyway. "Why?" Ha-Eun asked her. "You could fly cargo ships. You could survive this war. Why choose this?" Su Jin smiled. "Because those 40 billion people in the camps need someone to try. Because my brother died in the first week of the war and I want to make it mean something. Because I am a human, and we do things that do not make sense sometimes. We do them anyway." The flight to the Valorian position took 3 days. Su Jin flew low and fast, using the shield technology to hide from their sensors. She watched the blips on her screen that showed the Valorian ships getting closer and closer. When she was close enough to see them with her own eyes, she felt her heart slow down. They were so many, so vast, so impossible to fight against. But she kept flying forward. The first lines of defense saw her and tried to shoot her down. Su Jin flew through their fire like a dancer moving through rain. The second line of defense tried harder. She lost her shield on her left side. The third line of defense hit her engines. She could feel her ship starting to break apart around her. The warning lights filled her cockpit with red light. Her hands were shaking, but she kept the ship steady and kept flying forward. At the center of the Valorian fleet, the largest ship orbited like a god overseeing its domain. That was where Su Jin needed to be. That was where the broadcast would reach the most minds. Her engines were failing. Her ship was burning. She had seconds left before everything went dark. So she pushed the accelerator down as far as it would go and flew directly at the largest ship in the galaxy. At the exact moment her ship broke apart, Su Jin activated the broadcast. The signal spread outward in a wave of pure mathematics and frequency and quantum information. It washed over the Valorian fleet like lightning. In that moment, 30 billion minds that had always been connected to each other suddenly became 30 billion individual minds. For the first time in 5,000 years, the Valorian experienced loneliness. They experienced confusion. They experienced the terrible, wonderful freedom of being alone in their own heads. The Valorian fleets stopped moving, not in any organized way, but in chaos. As individual beings suddenly unsure of what to do found themselves in control of weapons and ships. Some ships collided with each other. Some began to drift. Some simply went dark, their crews too overwhelmed to function. And in that moment, humanity saw something it had not seen in 8 months of war. A chance. What humanity had created was more dangerous than they had understood. The breaking of the collective consciousness did not bring peace. It brought chaos and terror. The Valorian minds, suddenly individual after 5,000 years of unity, began to panic. Some ships began firing on each other because the crews did not know who was friend or enemy anymore. Some ships turned their weapons on themselves, their crews choosing death rather than face the overwhelming weight of being alone for the first time. Hundreds of Valorian ships crashed into each other or into the remains of human settlements they had conquered. The screams filled the communications channels. The communications officers of the human fleet had to turn down the volume because it was too painful to listen to. For 1 week, it seemed like humanity might actually win. The Valorian fleet was broken and confused. The human forces regrouped and began to mount counterattacks. They pushed back against the invaders. They won territory that they had lost. There was hope in the eyes of the soldiers and pilots who had been fighting this war. Hope was a dangerous thing when you had lived without it for so long. But then something changed. One commander in the Valorian forces was different from the others. His designation in the collective had been Unit Prime 447, but he had been starting to develop individual thoughts even before the broadcast came. When the collective shattered, Unit Prime 447 did not panic. Instead, he saw an opportunity. He saw that the other Valorian were confused and frightened. He saw that they were weaker than they had ever been, and he saw that they needed someone to follow, someone to tell them what to do and who to be. The humans began to call him Kale. It was not his real name. It was just the closest thing the human language could make of his Valorian designation. Kale was brilliant in a way that was both like and unlike the human commanders. He understood strategy and tactics like all Valorian did. But he also understood something new, the Valorian capacity for individual fear and hatred. Kale gathered around him the strongest Valorian commanders. He promised them order and purpose. He promised them that together they could take back what they had lost. He promised them that they would not have to be afraid anymore if they just did what he said. The Valorian listened. They gathered under Kale's command. Their numbers grew. And slowly, impossibly, the broken Valorian fleet began to organize again. But this time it was different. This time, it was driven by fear and by hatred. Kale taught them that humans had destroyed their peace. Humans had broken them. Humans had made them suffer. Kale was teaching them to be individuals, and the first individual thing many of them learned was rage. Captain In-Su watched the reorganization happening on his sensors and felt his heart sink. He reported to General Min-Seo that the Valorian were uniting again under a single leader. In-Su said, "It is worse than before. Before they thought as one perfect mind. Now they think like us. They have fear and anger and hatred. They will be much more dangerous." Min-Seo listened and nodded because it was true. This was the terrible cost of what they had done. They had freed the Valorian from their perfect collective. But what they had freed was not kindness and peace. What they had freed was the raw emotions that came with being an individual. The Valorian were learning to feel, and the first things they felt were pain and rage. Kale began his attacks with purpose and intelligence. He no longer tried to conquer human space piece by piece. Instead, he focused his forces. He struck at the refugee camps. He understood now in a way the collective never could, that humans cared more about other humans than they cared about land or resources. If he destroyed the camps, he would break human morale. He would make them desperate and afraid. The camps on the moons of Jupiter were attacked with precision. The Valorian forces killed 2 billion people in the first strike. 2 billion. It was not as many as they had killed in the outer colonies, but it felt personal in a way that the larger numbers did not. Humans had names. Humans had families. 2 billion meant 2 billion stories of people who had survived this long only to die at the end. It meant children who had lived their entire lives in refugee camps, never knowing anything but survival, finally becoming something else, the dead. Commander Tae-O, who had been commanding the defense forces from a hidden station, felt something break inside him when he heard the numbers. He had made the decisions that led to this. He had chosen to use the broadcast. He had known that it might create a worse enemy, but he had thought that whatever came after would be better than the certainty of extinction. Now, he was not sure. Dr. Kite brought him calculations. Kite was a mathematician, one of the greatest that humanity had. She had run simulations of the Valorian actions under Kale's command. The results were terrible. If Kale continued to attack the camps, if he focused on killing civilians instead of fighting military forces, humanity would be destroyed within 3 years. The mathematics did not lie. The only way to save any humans at all was to destroy the camps before Kale could. "You are telling me we have to murder them," Teo said. "You are telling me we have to kill the billions of people we have saved in order to prevent Kale from killing them." "Yes," Kite said simply. "The mathematics are certain. If we do not do this, all of them will die. If we do this, many will die, but billions might survive." General Minseo called for a vote in the War Council. The vote would decide the fate of 40 billion people. Minister Ra Young argued for the genocide. She said that quick death was better than slow death. She said that suffering always ended in the end, and why should they prolong it? She said that humanity's survival was what mattered. "We save ourselves," she said, "and we honor the dead by continuing on." But Ambassador Ho Jun wept as she argued against it. "If we kill them," Ho Jun said, "then Kale has won. He has made us monsters. He has made us the very thing we were fighting against. We will have freed ourselves from the Valorian only to enslave ourselves to our own darkness." The debate went on for hours. Humans who had loved ones in the camps begged the council not to vote for death. Soldiers who had fought for those camps for 8 months said they would lay down their weapons rather than become killers of the innocent. But other soldiers said that sacrifice meant nothing if everyone died. Other people said that horror was sometimes necessary. The vote was split, with more voting for death than for life, but not by much. Teo looked at the results and felt old in a way that had nothing to do with age. Humanity had been pushed to the edge of a cliff, and now they were being asked to jump off it themselves, just to avoid falling. He looked at the faces of the council members and understood that they were good people. They were not evil. They were just desperate. Desperation was the most dangerous thing in the universe, he decided. It was more dangerous than any weapon. It could make good people do terrible things and believe they were right to do them. "No," Teo said finally, "we will not do this." The council went silent. Minseo looked at Teo and asked, "Then what do we do?" Teo did not have an answer yet, but he knew that there had to be another way. There had to be a way to fight Kale without becoming what Kale was. There had to be a way to save humanity without sacrificing their souls. He did not know what it was, but he was going to find it. Because if humanity won this war, but lost itself in the winning, then what was the point of surviving at all? In a secret lab buried beneath one of Saturn's moons, scientist Park Mi had been working on something that no one knew about. Park Mi was a woman of deep conscience. She was brilliant enough to understand the technology of the broadcast that had broken the Valorian collective. But she was also wise enough to understand what breaking them had cost. For months, she had been working on a different kind of weapon. A weapon that would not destroy. A weapon that would heal. Park Mi had taken the research that had been done on the Valorian consciousness and turned it around. Instead of shattering their unity, what if you could reshape it? What if you could give them back their connection to each other, but change what that connection meant? Park Mi called it the Exodus Protocol. It would restore the neural patterns that bound the Valorian to each other, but it would do so in a way that removed the drive for conquest and expansion. It would fill them with the capacity to coexist peacefully. It would be a kind of remake, not destruction, but transformation. Park Mi knew that the idea was extreme. She knew that it meant essentially rewriting 30 billion minds. She knew that some people would call it wrong. But she also knew that the only alternative was death. Either the death of the Valorian or the death of humanity, or both. She worked alone in her lab, with no one to help her and no one to tell her that what she was doing was impossible. She worked because she had to believe that there was a third option, a way that did not lead to genocide or destruction, a way that led to something better. When Park Mi finally emerged from her lab, she went directly to Commander Teo. She said, "I have another choice for you, a third path." Teo listened as Park Mi explained the Exodus protocol. She told him how it would work. She told him the risks. She told him that it had never been tested and might not work at all. It might kill the Valorian. It might kill humans. It might do nothing. But it was a chance to save them without becoming murderers. Teo felt hope rise in his chest for the first time in days. He felt something that was not quite relief, but close to it. "Can we build the weapon?" he asked. "It is already built," Park Mi said. "But it needs to be delivered to the Valorian fleet and activated there. Whoever does that will be at the center of the enemy forces when it activates. They will not survive." Teo nodded. He had expected as much. Every solution to this war seemed to require someone to die. But at least this death would be one person instead of billions. It was still a terrible choice, but it was a choice that could be made. Teo called a meeting with General Minseo and the other commanders. He told them about the Exodus protocol. He told them about Park Mi's work. He told them what it would cost. The room was silent for a long time after he finished speaking. Then Minseo said, "We cannot ask anyone to volunteer for this. This is too much." "We must ask," Teo said, "because the alternative is to give up, and I am not ready to do that." But Teo knew that no one would volunteer if he asked, so he decided not to ask. He decided to do it himself. He told Park Mi that he would pilot the broadcast vessel. Park Mi tried to argue with him. "You are the commander," she said. "You are needed here. Others can do this." But Teo shook his head. "Others can lead as well as I can," he said, "but I am the one who made the decision to use the first broadcast. I am the one who broke the Valorian. I am the one who is responsible for what Kyle has become. So I will be the one to fix it." The broadcast vessel was small and fast. It was designed to move through space quickly and get to where it needed to be. Teo prepared himself, making peace with the fact that he would die. He thought about his family on Earth, people he had not seen in person in over a year. He thought about the soldiers he had commanded who had died in this war. He thought about Su Jin, the pilot who had sacrificed herself to break the collective. He thought about what his death would mean, and whether it would be enough. In the final moments before launch, Park Mi brought him something. It was a small object, made of some kind of polymer that felt warm in Teo's hand. "It is from the people in the camps," Park Mi said. "They know what you are going to do. They asked me to give you this." Teo opened it and found a message. It was written in handwriting, millions of different handwritings, one on top of another until the entire thing was covered in names and words and drawings. Some were from children, some were from old people. They all said the same thing in different ways. "Thank you." Teo felt tears on his face, and he did not try to stop them. He put the object in his pocket, held it close to his heart, and walked to the broadcast vessel. The flight to the Valorian position was strange. Teo had imagined that he would feel fear or sadness or regret, but what he felt instead was peace. He had made his choice. It was the right choice. Whatever happened next was in the hands of fate and mathematics and the universe itself. There was nothing more he could do, so he let go of the need to do anything. When he reached the center of the Valorian fleet, no one tried to stop him. Perhaps they did not see him. Perhaps they were too busy with their own chaos and confusion. Teo flew directly toward the largest ship, the same ship that Kale used as his command center. As the distance closed, Teo spoke one last message to be recorded and sent back to human space. "My name is Commander Teo," he said. "I am the one who broke your collective. I am the one who caused your suffering, and I am the one who will try to heal it. This is not an act of war. This is an act of mercy. I hope that when you wake up from what I am about to do, you will understand that it was not meant to hurt you, but to save you. I am sorry for what you have suffered, and I am sorry for what I must do to try to make it right." He activated the Exodus protocol. The broadcast spread outward in waves. It was not like the first broadcast, which had been sudden and violent. This one was gentle. It was like sunrise spreading across a dark planet. The neural patterns began to reshape themselves. Individual minds suddenly felt connection coming back. The loneliness and fear began to fade, but something was different. The drive for expansion and conquest was gone. In its place was the capacity for understanding, for peace, for coexistence. The Valorian felt themselves becoming something new, something they had never been before. The first sign that it was working was when the weapons' fire stopped. One by one, the Valorian ships ceased their attacks. Some transmitted surrender, others simply powered down, their crews too overwhelmed to do anything but feel the changes happening inside their own minds. In his command ship, Kyle felt the broadcast hit him. He felt the connections to his followers reforming. He felt the power he had been building beginning to slip away. But more than that, he felt the hunger for conquest and war beginning to die inside him. For a moment, Kyle resisted. He tried to fight the changes, tried to hold on to what he had become. But the broadcast was designed well. Parkme had done her work perfectly, and slowly, Kyle let go. His fortress went dark. The war, which had lasted for 8 months of fighting and had killed hundreds of billions of beings, ended in silence.